We are in grave trouble. There are 3 to 6 billion human beings on the face of the earth. According to our best estimates, there are somewhere between 3 and 7 times more people than this planet can possibly maintain over a long period of time. Non-renewable resources are being exhausted at a horrendous rate, and we are destroying the capability of the planetary ecosystem to renew the supply of renewable resources.
environment is a system of living things. The Earth is our environment. The capacity of our environment to provide space, to produce food, and to supply energy are all limited. Humans thrive on less than 17% of the Earth's surface, and only about 4% will grow crops. We depend on these limited resources for our survival. Yet we are increasing our population as if they were infinite. This fact is at the core of our environmental problems. On this map, we'll show population growth from the year 1 CE to the present and project our growth into the year 2050. Population concentrations will be indicated by dots, each of which will represent 1 million people. In areas where people are spread out and don't live in concentrations of 1 million, dots are placed in the middle of their approximate range. Historical references will be provided by images and text at the bottom of the screen. Our population is expected to grow to 10 billion by the end of this century. Yet the Earth's size remains the same. Slowing human population growth and lowering our use of natural resources are key to reducing the impact we have on the planet. Through the decisions we make about our lifestyles, our numbers, and our consumption, we can all help preserve the health and beauty of our home.
A 1,000 years ago, there were only 1/3 of a billion people, but we were multiplying. Now there's 7 billion of us. How did we grow so much so fast? Say this glass is North America. The fuller the glass gets, the more people there are. Water drips in as people are born. Water drips out as people die. Okay, here's the entire world. Now let's go back 1,000 years. The Americas are nearly empty. Europe and Africa have less than 100 million people between them. And just like today, most people live in China, India, and the rest of Asia. For centuries, things stay pretty much the same. Births are canceled out by deaths. Women are having lots of babies, but most babies die before they grow up and have families of their own. We don't reach 1 billion until 1804. But things are changing. Better medicine and better agriculture are starting to slow the leak from the bottom of the glass. People still die, of course, but more babies grow up and have babies of their own. Lots of babies. We've grown from 1 billion to 7 billion, and it only took 200 years. Will we keep going like this? Probably not. The UN says we'll level out at 10 billion by the end of the century. So as we continue to grow from 7 billion, the question is, can the world hold that many people? Experts can't agree. It all depends on how well we manage our food, water, and energy.
It's official. There are now 7 billion people on Earth. And projections show we'll top 8 billion just 12 years from now. What's going on? How did we get here? Well, to understand population growth, we should really start at the beginning. Turns out it took all of human history, about 50,000 years, up to the year 1800 to reach the first billion inhabitants. But once we hit that mark, things started to move. The number doubled to 2 billion in just 130 years. 2 billion became 3 billion just 30 years later. It took 14 years to go from 3 billion to 4 billion, and we reached 5 billion 13 years later. You can see what's happening. 12 years later, we're at 6 billion, and another 12 years after that, we've reached 7 billion. What is surprising is that over the past 50 years, the actual growth rate has slowed, yet the size of the world's population continues to rise. So how can both things be happening? To find the answer, we have to go back a few hundred years. Profound changes were happening. The Industrial Revolution transformed the way people lived and worked. With improved economic conditions, people lived longer. Then in the 20th century, better sanitation and modern medicine extended life even further. And family life began to change. Women's roles expanded. There was greater access to modern contraception, and more kids were enrolled in school. All this led to smaller families and longer lives. This is what experts call a demographic transition that marks the shift in birth and death rates. So what does it mean on a global scale? To understand global, we actually have to think local. That's because demographic transitions happen country by country. And at any given time, the world contains a mix of countries that are in various stages of transition. In the early phase of a demographic transition, both birth rates and death rates are high. These countries generally have very young populations and fewer older citizens. But as countries develop, living conditions improve and people live longer. Birth rates, however, are still high, so population growth is still rising. Now look at countries that have transitioned even further. Life expectancy goes up while people have fewer children, but the population is still growing because of the greater number of people at younger ages. At the end of the transition, most population growth has stabilized with low birth and death rates. And in some cases, the population actually declines because there are more deaths than births, which gets us back to the original question. Why is world population still rising even though the actual growth rate has slowed? The simple answer is because right now we're at a point in history where there are still more people living in countries in early transition with growing populations than people living in countries with stable or declining populations. So there you have it. 7 billion today and 8 billion projected in another 12 years. Understanding how and why the world's population is growing will help nations better plan for the future and for future generations.